What if the woman you think is simply being distant is actually trying not to reveal how deeply you affected her? Because when a woman truly feels nothing, you usually don't have to decode anything. But when you've touched something emotional inside her, the signs can become surprisingly quiet. And sign number 5 is the one most men completely misread. Maybe she doesn't text you first. Maybe she acts completely normal around you. And yet, something about her behavior feels different. You start wondering, did I actually mean something to her? Or am I imagining all of this? Don't make that conclusion yet. Because the first sign isn't what she says, it's what she remembers. A woman can forget hundreds of conversations, but when a man touches something emotionally meaningful inside her, tiny details can stick. And sometimes she reveals that memory without even realizing it. She remembers something you casually told her weeks or even months ago. Your favorite song, a random story from your childhood, something you said you were worried about. You may have forgotten saying it. She didn't. And here's why that matters. People tend to remember information that carries emotional meaning. But don't immediately assume that remembering one detail means she's secretly in love. That's not the point. The real clue is what happens next. Does she bring that detail back into the conversation naturally? Because that's when the second sign becomes much more interesting. Sign number 2, she becomes unusually curious about the parts of your life that most people don't see. Not just your job, not your hobbies, not your Instagram, your mind. And that's a very different level of attention. She asks questions that go underneath the surface. Why did you decide that? What happened between you two? What do you actually want? Or she remembers something emotional you told her and asks about it later. That's not necessarily attraction, but it can signal that you've become psychologically interesting to her. And that leads to a much quieter sign, because sometimes she won't get closer. She'll actually become more careful. And this is where a lot of men get completely confused. They think, if she likes me, why isn't she making this easier? The answer can be surprisingly simple. Sign number 3. She becomes more self-conscious around you. Watch what happens when you suddenly enter the room. Does her posture change? Does she adjust her hair or clothes? Does her voice become slightly different? Does she suddenly become more aware of how she's coming across? One moment she's completely relaxed. Then you appear, and suddenly she's checking herself. That doesn't prove romantic feelings, but it can reveal something important. Your presence has started affecting her internal state. And if that's happening consistently, don't overlook it. Because the next sign is even quieter. She may actually try to hide the fact that you're affecting her. And ironically, the attempt to hide it can become the clue. Sign number 4. She notices you without making it obvious that she's noticing you. Maybe she looks at you when she thinks you're distracted. Maybe she remembers where you were. Maybe she seems aware of who you're talking to. Maybe she notices small changes in your appearance. But when you catch her, she suddenly acts like she wasn't looking at all. Now, this is where men often make the biggest mistake. They see one glance and think, she's definitely into me. No, one glance means almost nothing. Patterns mean something. If the same awareness keeps appearing across different situations, then you've got something more meaningful to observe. Because emotional impact doesn't always look like affection. Sometimes it looks like awareness. She knows when you enter. She notices when you leave. She remembers what you said. And somehow, your presence registers more strongly than it used to. But now comes the sign that can really expose emotional impact. Sign number 5. She starts revealing parts of herself she doesn't usually reveal. Not necessarily dramatic secrets. Sometimes it's something much smaller. A fear, an insecurity, a family story, a personal dream. Something she normally keeps behind the emotional walls. When someone feels psychologically safe with you, they may gradually lower those walls. And if she starts saying things like, "I've never really told anyone this," pay attention. Because that sentence isn't automatically romantic, but it does mean you've entered a part of her world that isn't available to everyone. And here's the part most men miss. You don't necessarily touch someone's soul by saying the perfect thing. Sometimes you do it by making them feel seen. And that's why the final clue isn't about what she does around you. It's about what changes after you leave. 3, 20, 3, 30. High retention turn. The strongest sign isn't one isolated behavior. It's a pattern of emotional investment. She remembers. She notices. She becomes more open. She responds differently around you. And your conversations seem to stay with her. When several of these happen consistently, that's when the picture becomes much clearer. And here's something every man needs to understand. If you've genuinely touched her emotionally, you don't need to force her to prove it. You don't need to double text. You don't need to interrogate her. You don't need to manufacture jealousy. You simply give her room to show you what she actually feels.